All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Anab, and I am a designer and founder of a studio called Superflux. We are based in London, and we also have a presence in Ahmedabad in India, where I'm from originally. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me. It's been a great conference. So at Superflux, we do commercial interaction design projects, which are often client-facing. But we also like to play and do speculative work. And so through our lab, we do projects that are experimental in nature. And today I'd like to talk to you about one such project, which hopefully fits quite well within this panel and conference, because it was looking at, especially in the context of the previous panel about doing it together, yesterday's panel about open projects and open source and sort of collaborative futures that Mushan was talking about. So yeah, let me just dive in. So I think it was sometime late 2008 that London acquired Crunchy, a fat, greedy, money-eating monster that was scaring us all half to death. Crunchy became a symbol not only of the economic crisis, but in a sense started representing a rather foreboding that yet a real threat of collapse. Not to mention the fears around climate change and a war on terror that only added to the sense of gloom. Fears normally associated with science fiction around collapse started entering public domain and became part of our lives. Yes, the future seemed bleak. And there were a few options that I could think of doing. One was to try and go and join a protest that was going on around the G20 summit in London. Or I could use my credit card and go on a Crunchy beach holiday that were being advertised in the middle of the economic crisis. Instead, I decided to make this video. Oh, we don't have audio. Sorry. Huh.
Power of 8, take one.
Hi, my name is Anab and I'm a designer. I have recently secured funding from the Arts Council England and the Waterman's Gallery in West London to do an exciting project called The Power of 8. It is a collaborative experiment in designing our future, and this video is a call for collaborators to come on board and join the project. So what is it about? Like many of you, I too am a bit perplexed by the current gloom and doom surrounding the economic crisis, climate change, and many other foreboding threats of war and terrorism. I'm beginning to wonder, what is the future I have hoped for? And where does it collide with these gloomy projections? And I'd like to ask you, what are your aspirations and dreams of the future? The Power of 8 is a chance for us to build and rearrange our visions of the futures we have imagined together. If this is together, or to explore another point of view, or perhaps build valuable tools. Yeah, and so this video, and then I advertised the website where this call was open, and I put out, send letters to my neighbors and friends, and yeah, put this up on Vimeo and stuff. The reason I was trying to do this was to think of a DIY approach to future making now. The other thing was to try and encourage a debate on alternate futures that might be possible outside of what politicians and policy planners might be thinking about as what are the aspirations of the people on the streets. And much to my surprise, people actually responded to this call. And after discussions with few people, I assembled our like cast of 8 people. There's Charlie, who's a social researcher. There's Chris, who is a retired civil servant. Sanjeev is a scientist and a biotechnologist. Tessie is a teacher. Chris is a hacker. Liam is an urban designer. And Graham is a permaculturist. So we decided that this was a kind of quite an exciting crew to come on board. But why would people want to join this sort of project outside of your regular day jobs and commitments? So Charlie wanted to join because I'm depressed that in 50 years' time, people will look back at the year when the world had its last chance to make binding international agreements on climate change, and they'll find a load of stories about MP's expenses and a supposed global pandemic that killed a handful of people. So Charlie was clearly very politically motivated, and everyone else had their own sort of little interest in trying out this sort of an experiment. And so we started off almost like a guerrilla summer school, meeting in our lounges and our drawing rooms and our pubs and cafes, and trying to draw these sort of ways in which we can give each of our individual aspirations a space to grow. But more importantly, it became a space for us to start building trust. Because very often you hear now about, yeah, we must do collaborative work, we must do collaborative projects, and it takes time. It is a matter of building that trust. And finally, the project almost exploded when we asked this very specific question: what would you like on your street in the future? A lot of people who came on board were not designers or artists who were spending a lot of their time thinking about the future. They were thinking about a mortgage repayment, they were thinking about their kids' education, they were thinking about buying a house, about getting married. And these individual aspirations were quite different from the collective hopes that they had for society at large. And this wall became a sort of ideas wall. Everyone started quickly pasting things that they would like to see, from a stem cell-based one-stop shop to a micronation where debate is allowed, and someone even wanted monkey cats, the perfect dinner guests. So it was really a chance for everyone to just go and put it all on paper there. However, conflict is part of this sort of a process, and one question or statement that kept coming up again and again was, that's your future, not mine. You might want a Taiwanese noodle shop on your street, I don't. And so the key questions that came out of this was, how do we design collaborative futures? How can we use conflict for creative ends? And how do we move towards a unified vision? And is that even possible or desirable? We left these questions brewing in the back of our heads and decided to open the dialogue up even further. So we took this wall of ideas and went to the gallery in Brentford, which was hosting us, and placed it there. And over a course of 6 weeks, visitors who were visiting the gallery started posting their own ideas of the street they wanted on top of this wall, our wall. And just to give you a glimpse of what some people wanted was an end to global warming, community gardens everywhere, TVs at home next to you, a house we can afford, and a little field on our street. Quite interesting to see a huge variety of ideas that came up. But as a designer, I was eager to get our hands dirty, and so were the other 8 people. And so we decided to try a more concentrated public engagement activity as part of the London 2012 Open Weekend project. And so we took a huge table into the gallery, placed a big map of Brentford, and stuck it on the table, and put loads of Lego and foam on this table. And over a course of the weekend, visitors who came by started building their own sort of future Brentford in Lego and foam on top of this table. So it became a sort of platform for trying out quickly what your aspirations might be. From windmills to solar-powered airships to snow simulators, this table became a sort of Legoland of the future, if you might say, leaving us very inspired and with a vision that you can sort of try and put things together in a platform that is individual and collective at the same time, if you might. And so what we did is we went back and we placed a big tracing paper on our wall of ideas and started to draw our individual parts, things that we wanted. So something like this. So each person had the chance to start plotting their own journeys through this future map.
Cheating.
Some cheating as well.
Oh no.
But from one path, it became 8 different paths, and what we call a post-psychogeography. So instead of kind of where the derive is reverse engineered, instead of aimlessly drifting through unknown cityscapes, we plotted a route through a psychogeographic territory of our own making with yet unexpected consequences. And this kind of became really interesting, that we found so many of these common spots, these hotspots, which were these common areas that we were all interested in. And from this evolved our key concerns, which were around dying bees, depleting natural resources, and increasing food shortage. So it was quite interesting. Now, how does one take this forward? You can write about it, you can blog about it, you can go and share it with your friends, but we wanted to make something very tangible. We wanted to exhibit it in a gallery. We wanted people to come and interact with it again. And so from that came the idea of Acres Green. And Acres Green is a fictional town in the future which addressed some of the dilemmas we faced about this desire for a green future, but also hoping that at the same time that technology and technological innovations could and will save us from any crisis around the climate. So in Acres Green, people balance a pragmatic requirement to live closer to nature with their natural human impulses to subvert and control it. And we did use a narrative format to explore this idea. We used stories, we used lots of provocations to explain what we were meaning by this. So let's go inside Acres Green and let's see how people in Acres Green live. In the hacked and re-engineered world of Acres Green, there are three main things. We've got new pollinators, we've got new weather, and we've got new economies. First up, new pollinators. So bee die-off, a sign of the apocalypse, was a very popular headline in Boing Boing a while back. And most of you are aware of the colony collapse disorder, of the fact that bees are dying. And yes, we must save them. But in Acres Green, bees are almost a thing of the past. And also the demands of urban food pollination in urban areas are really high. So a community of biologists and biohackers create the Beamer bee, or the Beamer Cygnum apis mellifera. And in this diagram, you see that plasmids of different creatures, including the bat, are put together in the embryo of the bee to create this new kind of bioengineered Beamer bee. Unlike the current Beamer bees that apparently run away and are scared of the electromagnetic smog, our Beamer bees actually live in harmony with the radio waves. And here's a little video showing how these were made.
Today we're going to make the bees. Now we want our bees to have various different characteristics. Number one, to look colorful. Number two, to have strong wings so that they can fly longer. Number three, that they've got long legs with a lot of fibers on them so that they can get the pollens onto them, which helps in pollination. So all this starts down here in this freezer room. This is F1, Rack 1, Box 1. Put all these plasmids into a bee larva. It's collagen, the structural protein that all of us have in our body. These are carbon nanotubes. We add this carbon nanotubes to collagen, and what we get? Really strong scaffolds which allow having strong wings. We're going to make special bees out of these plasmids, which is a mixture of 4 different plasmids. So I'm going to leave them now in the incubator, 37 degrees, and then introduce them into the embryonic larvae of bees. So after weeks of preparation, what we have here are thousands of bee larvae, or let's say in other words, bee embryos. We're going to be letting these embryo develop further, regularly monitoring them, and finally, one day, we would be having those bees we've been designing for the last few weeks. That's beautiful.
Yeah, so that was the Beamer Cygnum apis mellifera, and we, in the space, we wanted to show how people might interact with these bees which are sensitive to radio waves. So as you see, there's an interface from your phone, or it was a special bugle that had a bee channel that would call the bees to your garden to pollinate your bees. And this is the sort of ways in which people were interacting with these new kinds of insects. But our main interest was to start seeing how would people actually adapt these new creatures? There's a lot of things about, a lot of talk around creating new organisms from scratch, and there are a lot of ethical issues around this. But as a designer or as a kind of group of community of people who are going to possibly live in a different future where new creatures will enter our lives, our interest was in seeing how people would actually adapt to these things. So in this one, you have a family. They've put their Wi-Fi router outside in the garden, and that has a very strong radio wave signal, and it attracts the bees to pollinate their garden. A side benefit is that children can keep glowing bees as pets. You also realize that honeybee, the Beamer bee syrup, has got high medicinal value. Moving on, keeping with such innovations, they also attempt to innovate new weather systems. So they designed microclimates, and the first thing they did was to try and bring rain to local areas without depending on the increased fluctuations in the climate. For this, they designed a robotic flocking cloud, where the cloud would expand and become a water reservoir. It had an ultrasonic antenna which would guide it to other clouds. They would flock together and it would rain. But the local residents could also use different sorts of things to signal these clouds towards them. And so you see here is a sort of rooftop competition going on where local people began to compete for clouds' attention using homemade ultrasonic emitters. We also imagine what an unanticipated outcome of such a machine creature might be. A scenario where the swarming clouds get attracted to bats and their ultrasonic waves, and this in turn becomes a spectacle to watch out for as the bats start flocking around self-illuminating clouds. And lastly, new weather systems and new pollinators allow the locals to grow more food in their backyards and streets, and new microeconomies emerge. So here's a poster of an entrepreneur who started the apple trading initiative. So lots of apples were lying waste. In fact, in London, I know my neighbors think that the apples are poisonous. We have a lot of interesting ideas about which apples are edible and which are not. And so he started collecting lots of apples and began to sell apple juice. And this was a real thing that we tried. We put it on Free Cycle, and we went around London collecting lots of apples from different people. The other thing that emerged was the Murgatroyd Cider Company. So it was an inner-city feral cider made from community apples found in parks, public gardens, and streets. All of these sorts of artifacts, prosthetics, scenarios, images, videos, and films were exhibited again in the same gallery in Brentford, where we did our first public engagement activity. And 5,674 local residents came over a period of 3 weeks. We were there, and we continued the discussion with them. So in a sense, it was a three-month collaborative experiment, I'd say. But I think the question that one obviously asks is, what impact can such a design experiment have? What is the, and it's a valid question, and I think at the moment the impact is pretty small, but we are seeing it multiply already. So for instance, you form new points of view. Tessie, who was one of the main collaborators and a teacher, said, I couldn't really say I wanted fake bees and fake weather. But this helped me feel optimistic that we could actually do something to protect it. The other was the idea of encouraging DIY futures, whether you call it do-it-yourself, doing it together, this whole idea that, actually let me read Adam Greenfield's manifesto from Do Projects, which says, figure out what do-it-yourself might mean in an age when new production technologies and networks give their mature producer unprecedented power to reach out and make things happen with a consequence, with a provocation, but also things that move and do crazy things, which will actually have some sort of an impact on my personal life. Project spin-off. So yes, microclimates is nowhere as controversial as geoengineering, but we are actually on a project spin-off is to design some sort of very local community-oriented microclimate system in the desert of North India. And Charlie, one of the social researchers who got completely into apples and got a press and everything, is now going ahead and starting a lot more projects around that. And lastly, for us as designers, it was learning new design processes. It was to embrace the sort of organic and messy things that come out of it. It was the idea that through conflicts and tensions, good things can emerge. And essentially, ever since, we're basically thriving on collaboration and building trust around such work. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
So like I said, my name's Corenza, and I've set up this new commissioning agency in Manchester called Buddleia. The reason for the name Buddleia is because, as people might know, the plant, but the Buddleia plant that takes root in any urban environment and just seems to sort of take over the most unattractive or the most uninviting of spaces and create beautiful flowers. So this was sort of the approach that I was taking, because with my agency I'm very interested in developing projects within an urban context. What I wanted to sort of kind of put across today is talk a bit about Buddleia and a particular project that I've been developing, kind of research project I've been developing up in Cheetham Hill in North Manchester, but also talk a little bit about my approach and practice in terms of curating and the kind of projects that I'm looking to develop through Buddleia, and hopefully with collaborations with artists and people. So the core work that I do is engaging artists, people and place. I'm very interested in the dynamic of the three. I feel like can't divorce one from the other, to be honest. And this kind of sense of collaboration, that projects don't happen on their own and without a disconnection with people and place in particular. With Buddleia and being based up in North Manchester, and I could go into that in a bit more detail later on, I'm very interested in developing a kind of a relationship with a particular place, develop a sense of the context of a place, and obviously people are key to that. Some of the projects I've sort of done previously, which sort of led me to where I am today, which I'll quickly run through just to kind of give a precursor to where I was. The first one being with the Manchester International Festival last year with Jeremy Deller, where we did Procession, and people who don't know that, it was a big parade that took over the city centre, which was with people from across Greater Manchester, and looking at a sense of a joint identity around Manchester and the kind of cultural heritage, but seen through and obviously delivered by Jeremy and his particular take. And this example of illustration here is when we work with the Big Issue sellers. With Jeremy and his approach to parades, he was very interested about who the public were, who were the visible publics in city centres. And obviously with something like a civic parade is that sense of exclusion and who might not be included within a parade. And often the Big Issue sellers, although they are very part of our experience of the street and of the city, they would not necessarily be seen as someone who was maybe seen as suitable to be part of a parade that's meant to be celebrating the city and its civic pride. So we did some work with Big Issue sellers. They were one of the groups of people that we engaged with, one of the many groups of people we engaged with, and here they are taking part on the day. We also engaged young people, children, and it just kind of was a great example of quite a joyful celebratory event, but also kind of an intervention and a takeover in its own way. I'm also interested in past projects I've done around transforming space. So it's working with people, but also having a kind of physical impact on space as well. This is a project did over in Liverpool, part of the Capital of Culture 2008 programme, where I worked with 3 neighbourhoods and 3 kind of communities, effectively looking at transforming derelict spaces within their environments. So here you can see it's actually an old approach to Edge Hill Station. Edge Hill Station, people who know about their train history, is one of the most important, is the first passenger railway station in the world. But now sort of is pretty much derelict. And I worked with a local arts organisation there called Metal, who have since doing development work around that. But anyway, when we were there, our pavilion, the approach to pavilion, which is about taking over space and reintroducing it back to local people in a way that they could feel engaged and involved. And this is a this was a kind of consultation celebration day that we held to sort of just getting people back to using the space and seeing the space as something viable, as something they could actually do something in. And as you can see, that first image, covered in buddleia, of course, and also the rubbish tipped and all that kind of thing. And then obviously the event that we put on. And then this resulted in the final installation where we worked with an architect and an artist from Colombia, actually, a father and son team who came over, and they built this very sort of beautiful, pristine sculptural intervention in the space. Another project we worked in, I just wanted to show you the kind of before and after again. As you can see, not the very most inspiring of environments. This was in North Liverpool. And this, we worked with a community college who was just literally across the road from that. We did an engagement day on a very, very wet June day. And but despite the rain, people did come out and engage with us about what they wanted to see happen on this space, their local space. And this is a project that we ended up delivering with working with a landscape architect called Gross Max. So these kind of examples, I'm whizzing through them because actually they're very process, labour-intensive projects which take at least a year and a half in development, which is a lot around collaboration and discussion and working out between the artists, the people, and then, like I say, and the place, what would be the most appropriate project to deliver. And over that period of time of spending time together, developing the ideas together, we end up with the most suitable solution, but also the solution that hopefully has got a sense of longevity and inspires people to feel reconnected and ownership of their local environment. So these were kind of projects that brought me to where I am today. And so I was very keen to establish a practice based in Manchester, having sort of worked around the region and wanted to set something up of my own. So with Buddleia, I was really looking for a location with which to start putting my roots, to carry on the metaphor, put the roots down, to start the conversation and to start working out what would work best and where. So I decided to look at Cheetham Hill. I don't know how many people are here from Manchester, so I'll just quickly run through a little bit about where Cheetham Hill is. It's just north of the city centre. The little train station you see at the bottom is Victoria Station. And literally it's like a mile and a half up a hill, up Cheetham Hill Road. Cheetham Hill is very historical. There's a lot of historical importance about it. There is Engels, when he came to Manchester and wrote The Conditions of the Working Class, he referred to Cheetham Hill quite a lot. The bottom end of Cheetham Hill, there was a very significant Jewish slum called Red Bank. It's sort of pincered by two rivers, the Irk and also the Irwell, and that was highly polluted. And he refers to that kind of contamination of land a lot. And he also calls it the breezy heights of Cheetham Hill, because being kind of one of the only really hill kind of aspects within the kind of very flat city, Manchester city centre. A lot of the wealthy bourgeoisie literally moved up the hill, and so to get away from the smog and the pollution of the area. So he referred to it quite a lot as a place that was very significant in the Industrial Revolution. The people the interesting thing about Cheetham Hill, is that it's highly populated by many immigrant groups, and the diversity is just phenomenal. There's 22 different languages spoken within a mile and a half radius. There's like 40 odd places of worship, and it's constantly changing and it constantly reinvents itself. Historically, it's very well known for its Jewish community. Now the kind of Asian Pakistani community has got a very distinctive a presence there, but within that there's Afro-Caribbean, there's Polish and Ukrainian, and the Irish World Heritage Centre is based there. The list goes on and on. So this is to get a sense of there's a cultural diversity with which you can really get a real sense of as well. And this is an image from one of the artists working with, which is a copy of the Engels text in context to where it was written. So that was a bit for so looking at Cheetham Hill, like as an overview, the starting point really then was Engels and his text, and looking at how this industrial place has had an effect on the kind of people who are based there. And so again, context is a really important and starting point for me, and also something when I start to invite artists to come and spend time there, something that they really have grasped hold of. So with Buddleia, I've commissioned 4 artists to just come and spend some time, actually. It was a very open brief. It's about long-term research. It was about them sort of getting a sense of the area. Just as I was getting a sense of the area, then I was inviting them to come and find their own perspective. Just quickly, the artists I've been working with, Jean, he's actually a Turkish artist, and he has a strong interest in, he has a good background in architecture and housing, and so his approach is sort of through an urbanistic view, and particularly how people navigate space and place. Neville Gabay, he's based down in the West Country, and Neville, he has a very interesting collaborative approach working with people over long periods of time. He sort of does these constant residencies where he spends long periods of time in particular places. And so he's done projects in the past with construction workers, community construction workers, and developed projects with them, say, around their cultural identity and it's variety of different things. To be honest, it's all about, he gets the inspiration from wherever he is, and the projects reflect that. Alison is a Manchester-based artist, and again, she's done a lot of work working with different types of communities in and around the Manchester area. And Jay, he's associated with the artist collective, the UHC, who take kind of radical and socio-political approaches to particular places. But primarily, they've all just had time. They've all just been given a bit of money to spend time, and this is what they've really engaged with the most. So the time the artists have been spending at Cheetham Hill have been surrounding things like conversations. So this is when we spent a day together. This is an amazing president of the Allotment Society, Emilio Antiglesi, who was quite an inspiring guy. We met local residents. We spent time with the Housing Association. So it's all just trying to contextualise where we were and what was kind of the most interesting thing to us. Observation. Jay, his project that he sort of actually is developing is all around flour and bread, and the flour, bread being obviously a staple for everybody's diet, but each community would bring a different bread, would have a different bread from their particular heritage, and so we're looking at bread being that kind of connectivity. And so we've spent time at the Sikh temple learning about chapati, for instance. There's a Jewish baker that we're learning about to make Jewish bread, and so the list goes on, and we're looking to sort of maybe develop some kind of global bakery from Cheetham Hill. So as well as the artist commissions, I've also been doing kind of local engagement events. So just again, trying to invite people to come and spend time in their local area and see what they might be most interested in. We did a walk along the Irk Valley, and we found some quite amazing aspects of natural beauty that you wouldn't necessarily imagine to be in the Cheetham Hill area. Actually, following on from this, next week I'm doing a wild food and foraging walk, and we're going out and we're going to be collecting food, and it's actually quite amazing how many things you can eat. I was chomping down on Japanese knotweed the other day, which was surprisingly tasty. So again, it's all about open invitations to local people about, again, seeing and experiencing their spaces in hopefully new and interesting ways. And finally, I've taken over an empty shop unit for 3 months in the Cheetham Hill area. This is a space to actually locate the project quite centrally within the area. I didn't necessarily want to have a gallery space per se. It's very much a project space, the space where the conversations are happening, the places where we'll be holding events, and that type of thing. Invited local artists, to put work in. But that's the kind of format. But primarily, it's been it has all been about research. It's all been about piloting new ideas, inviting artists into the area, getting a sense if this is a good way of working, and seeing how we might be able to develop projects in the future and establish Buddleia kind of more long term within the kind of Cheetham Hill and North Manchester area, which hopefully we'll be able to, and certainly the feedback is all indicating. So with the future, I'm not sure. I mean, it's all still open for interpretation. I really this is quite an interesting image of a piece of there's a big demolition of the Lancashire Dairies on Derby Road, and this developer sign, and all written on every sign all around the parameter is build a park, make this space available, let the community use it, and have some vision. And I just hope very much that with kind of the engagement of artists, and hopefully through Buddleia and talking with local people and encouraging them to be part of those conversations, then together we will develop some vision for Cheetham Hill. Thank you very much.
Okay, so my name's Adrian Hon. I'm the chief creative and co-founder of a company called Sixer Start, and we make games, online games, educational games, games for entertainment, serious games. We make games for Walt Disney, Fremantle, Nokia, BBC, Penguin, all these other companies. Most recently, we've won 3 South by Southwest awards for our project. Last year, We Tell Stories for Penguin, and this year, we won Best Game for Smokescreen, a game we made for Channel 4 Education. But I'm not really going to talk about actually the work we've done. I'm here because I'm interested in thinking about the purpose of play. So the first question really is, what is play? Well, play is really about having fun. In the course of playing, we might do other things. We might, for example, if we're playing a game like Civilization, we might learn about history. If we're playing football, we might get fit. If we're playing with Lego, we might learn a bit about engineering. But if it's not fun, if it's not entertaining what we're doing, then it ceases to be play and it becomes something else. I mean, maybe it's still a bit better than doing work, but it's not really play. And it's really important to recognize this, because play and games, which is really a type of play with more defined goals and rules, play is becoming increasingly important in society for reasons principally other than fun. Games are becoming important for what they can get people to do in the real world. So I'll give you an example. We all know about games and play for having fun. There's Halo, just in terms of entertainment. Incidentally, games are now bigger than the than the film and music industry in the UK put together. So it's not a small business. It's actually the biggest entertainment business there is. Games are also being used to market products. So this is a particularly insidious advert for Lost. If you watch Lost, you know about Oceanic Airlines Flight 815. This was put up in Chicago a couple of years ago. It's a kind of viral advert. So if you look at that and you go to the website, you'll learn about Lost, and hopefully you'll watch a TV show and tell your friends to watch a TV show. Games are also being used for persuasion. This is a game called Oligarchy, quite a good game where you are an oil corporation and your goal is to make as much money as possible, and in the process of that, you sort of destroy the world and overturn governments and so on. And you kind of, the point is to make you realize that actually, if your goal is increasing shareholder value, then you are going to do these sort of nasty things. We have made games for education. This is a game we most recently made called Smokescreen, which aims to teach 14 to 16-year-olds about online safety, about privacy, and about trust. Obviously, we didn't tell people that this was an educational game. We just said it was a game, and we hoped people would learn as part of it, but that's why we got paid to make it. We all know about Wii Fit. It's a game where the goal is to get fit. And you might not know about this. This is a game called America's Army. It's basically a game to recruit young people into the army in America. It's a first-person shooter. So this is the start of the game, and you kind of choose who you are. This is actually where you are. This is the recruitment office. You can see the poster over there. So it's all about military training, and it works. This is America's Army 3, not America's Army 1. So they are putting a lot of money, millions of dollars, into games as a good way of recruiting people. And so a lot of these games really fall under the banner of serious games. Serious games being a very kind of sexy topic at the moment, getting a lot of money from broadcasters. And the purpose of serious games, just to be clear, is to inform or educate or train or persuade people. And it sounds like a sort of new idea, but of course it's not new at all, as most things are not new. For example, board games have always had an agenda for quite a long time. This familiar-looking game is called the Landlord's Game. It's a forerunner of Monopoly, patented in 1904. And apparently the designer of this game wanted to demonstrate how rents enrich property owners and impoverish tenants, which was a Georgist idea. There's a guy called Henry George came up with the idea. And so the designer knew that some people could find it hard to understand these sort of anti-capitalist ideas. And so she thought that if she put those ideas into the form of a game, a kind of interactive game, they might be easier to demonstrate. So this is kind of, the early 20th century version of oligarchy, except it's there to show how, I guess, presumably we should get rid of property owners. I think the lesson has kind of been lost somewhat if you look at Monopoly now. This is the new version of Monopoly with, I think, sponsored by Visa. It's pretty horrific, actually. You get credit cards instead of money, so you can't steal money anymore. And so anyway, here we are now. It's 106 years later. We passed radio, we passed movies, and we passed board games and TV. And now games are back in the ascendancy again. And they are more popular, they're making more money than everyone else at the moment. And I think in a couple of decades, they'll make even TV's reach and power look a bit weak. And I think a big reason for this is that computing devices are everywhere, and they're getting smaller and smaller. And it started with personal computers, the big sort of BBC Micro that you'd have at home. And it slowly got smaller and smaller. Everyone's got a laptop now. And of course, everyone now has got iPhones that is basically quite a powerful computer. Well, a lot of people have got iPhones. A lot of people have got mobile phones that are increasingly networked. And these devices are making it possible for people to engage in games all the time, everywhere, over different time periods, with their friends, wherever they are in the world, in different physical spaces. So these devices, for whatever purpose we got them in the first place, talking to your friends, checking email, that sort of thing, they're kind of a back door for games to get in. And so, this is a fairly new thing, but there are already quite a few quite popular games out there at the moment that I'll run through. One is Gowalla, which is an iPhone game. Basically, it's a location-based game. So if you go outside and you go and visit, well, this is in San Francisco, but if you go and visit Bayside, a cafe, you can go and pick up a stamp, and you go and visit Safeway, you go and pick up a stamp, and you go around to these different locations, you pick up stamps, and that's it, and you share it with your friends, and it's kind of like a collecting game. But you might be interested to know it's got several million players around the world. Foursquare is another iPhone app. I use it. This is me. These are the different places I've been to. You kind of check in when you go to different buildings and locations and companies. And when you check in, so I checked in last night at the hotel, and I get points for checking in at the hotel. Kanga R is a mayor of Britannia Hotel. In other words, he's the person who's been there the most and theoretically gets discounts or whatever, probably not. Of course, there is a leaderboard in Manchester showing how many people have checked in. So Sebastian B has checked in 61 times since Monday. And you even get badges for using Foursquare a lot. And the point of Foursquare is that it shares your location with your friends who you kind of accept. So the dream idea is that you're in London or you're in Manchester and you see that one of your friends checks in at Starbucks down the road and you think, okay, I didn't know he was there. I'll go over there and I'll go meet him. Same sort of thing at conferences. And so game-like systems are really coming in everywhere, not just on the iPhone. I kind of say game-like because they're not really games. They're more like tracking and behavior reinforcement systems. So if you've ever used LinkedIn, you'll have seen something like this before. It's a little progress bar taunting you, saying you should go and complete your profile. And I haven't completed it after like 5 years. You know, add your specialities with an extra 5%. I mean, so what? But, you know, you kind of, a lot of people really, and I really want to finish off that bar because it looks incomplete. Also on eBay, you know, you get points for the items you sell and the items you buy. 143. I'm only 357 points away from my purple star. So why, you know, it seems kind of strange, but of course people get really excited about that sort of thing. Reaching the purple star, I would have to go and sell or buy 357 more things to get there. Anyway, leaderboards on everything. The purpose of these systems, the purpose of points and these sorts of things is encourage certain types of behavior. You know, maybe selling more things on eBay, maybe buying more things on eBay, maybe going out to, you know, more cafes, maybe going to museums a bit more, just more engagement. And by weighting the points and the achievements and the notifications differently, by assigning different amounts of points, you can associate artificial values with different behaviors. So this is a kind of really important point. For example, if you know, McDonald's could go and create a game, or you know, anyone could create a game, and they could go and make it such that you get 500 points for going to McDonald's, but only 100 points for going to Burger King. Or London Tourist Bureau could can make an application where you get 50 points for going to a museum, but only 10 points for going to something else. You create all these kind of values based on your own value system that can change people's behavior. And it sounds like, oh, you know, why would anyone really pay attention to this? But a lot of people can really be manipulated by points and leaderboards and by achievements. Because in another form, this is basically money. It's basically status. It's a number of Google hits you get. That's a leaderboard. You know, if you go and Google yourself and you go and see how many hits you get, people compare that. You know, if you're an author, you look at your Amazon sales rank, you see how high you are. You get really worried about how many sales, you know, or the bestseller list. That's a leaderboard of how well you do, and a lot of people judge themselves by it. If you're a scientist, it's an impact factor, the journals you're published in. You know, these are all leaderboards, and they might not be as apparent, but they are becoming more live and more updated, and they're giving more feedback, and they're sort of entering more and more into our lives through these sort of game-like systems. And they speak to some very fundamental desires, like wanting to be at the top of the class, you know, wanting to be at the best group, wanting to possess everything, you know, wanting to complete everything, to have a whole set of everything, and wanting to be rich. I'm not saying that everyone really wants this. I'm not saying that people can't learn to ignore this sort of completionist, you know, getting the most points desire. But, you know, everyone succumbs. You know, I started playing Farmville in January, just for a day, because that's my job. I have to learn about games, just to try it out, and ended up playing it for 6 weeks. So, you know, 42 days instead of one day. Not because it was fun. In fact, it's just an awful game, I think. But it was so I could go and beat my friends and go and get more, like, experience points. I could collect more stuff. I mean, that wasn't fun. It wasn't even really play. It was just I kind of wanted to get more points, and I knew that all my friends were playing it. And when I finished playing it, I just felt kind of like I'd completely wasted my time. But, of course, there are a lot of people who are still playing it. And it's not really a game, actually, Farmville. It's more like a social obligation. You know, it's like going to church or something. We need a new word. So anyway, when I see people talking about what good things games can do, I kind of get a bit nervous because there are a lot of people out there championing the power of games. And I'd like to see it because I'm a game designer. But, you know, I think I think a lot of people haven't really put a lot of thought into where this path leads us if we turn everything into a game. So there's no doubt that games can do good. Here's an idea that I came up with, you know, last week. It's not a particularly original one. It's a game that encourages growing vegetables. So, for example, we can go and put sensors on the plants and in the soil. These things exist. that kind of monitor the growth rates of plants and the moisture and that sort of thing. I mean, give people points for watering them. Points for growing a plant, achievements for making it through a season. You can level up by having a good mix of plants. You can get some free seeds or discounts on tools. If you invite friends into your garden, into your farm, you can unlock extra content if you work with your friends. It's a great way to sort of get people to grow their own food. And it probably would work, actually. I mean, the sensor's a bit difficult to make at the moment, but that sort of thing would probably work. Grafting a game system onto this kind of behavior to get people to play. And this comic strip actually shows how smart we can be when we're being stupid. At the same time as getting addicted to a game, any video game, we'll become very good at gaming the system. So there are a lot of Xbox games out there where you go and get points and you get achievements for doing certain things in the game. And a lot of people they don't really care actually what game they're playing. They just want to get more points. I've got a lot of friends who just buy games. They don't even care whether they're having that much fun. They're there to go and get more points for playing the games so they can beat their friends. And it just seems a bit self-defeating, really. So in practice, if we had a litter game where I get points for picking up litter, I might throw down a piece of litter and then pick it up again and do that about 10 times just to sort of get more points. I might cheat on an exam in this case. And it's really, all of this sort of comes to a question of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation about why we do things. When we concentrate more on extrinsic motivation, on giving people points or stars or money, I think we lose something. Intrinsic motivation is when you do something for the sake of doing it. When you read books, not because you want to become better at reading, but because reading books is a good thing to do, because you feel that it's worthwhile activity. You get something out of it, rather than just telling your friends that you read a book. In fact, any psychologist and any psychiatrist will tell you that the secret to being happy is to find a source of intrinsic motivation rather than worrying about what everyone thinks about you. And, trying to make everyone happy as well, or trying to make people better through extrinsic motivation, through rewards and points, is kind of very dangerous because we're very bad at designing good metrics, designing good ways of measuring people's behavior. We have to be very careful when we make goals. So, there's a big furor about hospital performance targets. One of my friends is a doctor. They recently put in this requirement that people don't wait don't stay in the waiting room for more than like 4 hours. So what happens is that the way the doctors got around this is that you left people in the waiting room for 4 hours, and at 3 hours and 59 minutes, you kind of move them to a different room. I mean, it's just pointless. You go and you're sort of meeting your performance target, but you're not actually making anything better. And this is why a lot of people are worried about SATs and school leaderboards. These sorts of things can be gamed. So we need to be very careful when we create these sort of reward systems and games, especially when we tie them to things that really matter, like money or promotion or social standing. So, okay, assuming we have good metrics, so can't we make serious games good? Sometimes we can get really good metrics. This is something that happened a couple of years ago. During the American election, they created kind of a leaderboard and a game and points if you're an Obama supporter and you called people to, vote for him. And of course, they made an iPhone app where you can go and, track your calls to your friends and you can see the leaderboard and so on. So great. That's a nice way of mobilizing people to do something good if you're an Obama supporter. Of course, they did a similar sort of thing in the UK elections. There's this terrible game called Cash Gordon made by the Conservatives where, if you connect to Facebook and you read the stuff and you tweet about, what was it, Gordon getting like £5 from the unions or whatever, you get points and you got this leaderboard here. You see the point? These games work for anyone, not just for people who want to do good, whatever that means. I can make a game where you spy on your neighbors or where you look for illegal immigrants. It probably work really well in Arizona or wherever the BMP is. You can make games for anything, and they probably would work as well. This sort of media, this sort of entertainment is value neutral. It doesn't just work for saving the world or saving the environment. It also works for kicking out immigrants if you wanted to do that sort of thing. So I'm going to sort of finish up very quickly. I just want to read, if my laptop wants to work. a quote from a book written by one of my friends, which I think is really relevant here. She was talking about people at Oxford, but it kind of applies to anything. She says, "There's a sense of mastery that comes in examinations. It's an experience that's rare in the outside world. The number of questions, the different ways they can be presented, these things are limited and can be explored, studied, and perfected. No wonder we spend our adult lives feeling we're simply pretending to know what we're doing. After 16 years spent doing exams where the lessons we've received fit perfectly the challenges we're faced with, our preparation for unpredictable events of normal life will always seem shoddy and haphazard." As a game designer, what we want to do is manipulate people. That's what games do. They get people to do things. They're interactive, unlike films or books or TV. Naomi, in her quote, imagined life as an exam. Game designers imagined life as a game. Game designers, with their tens of millions of dollars of budget now, and all their wisdom, will devise structures and rules for everything. For taking the bus, for brushing your teeth, for reading books, for going to school, all these things. And they'll have clear goals and clear outcomes. And our players will learn those rules, and they'll learn the rewards, and they'll internalize them, and they'll be happy, we hope, as long as they play by the rules. Which is, I find kind of really chilling, but this is what a lot of game designers think is going to happen. Thankfully, I've not seen many massive successes at this. Thankfully, I've not seen many massively dangerous things at this. And I don't think that necessarily that games are going to be any worse than TV. At least they might be more fun. But the fact is, game designers are getting better at this. They're getting better at manipulating behavior. They're getting better because of the devices we carry around with us at getting into every aspect of our lives. I spend most of my day thinking of new ways of making games more engaging and getting people to do new things. Sometimes our clients are marketers and advertisers trying to sell you a new car, a new computer game, or a new movie. Sometimes they're educators. Sometimes they're political parties. But, so the same principles can work on both. I draw the line in one place. We're not going to do anything for tobacco companies, but someone else will. So we have games that are trying to save the world and games that are trying to destroy the world. At least that's what I think. I think the only way to really get around this, and it's a really boring answer, is to educate people to make informed and rational choices about the world and what's good and what's bad. It's about having kids learn about ethics and philosophy and justice, which sounds like it's from the 19th century, but I think it's the best way to do it. Otherwise, people will just walk into one of these games without knowing what they're really doing. A game might save the world, it might destroy it without any kind of knowledge. So as a game designer, I feel that our responsibility is to make these games good and to be careful with the power that we have to manipulate people and to ultimately have our players care more about doing good things for the sake of doing good than for shiny achievement points and levels and badges. Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I've taken something from each of these talks so far, and I'm particularly delighted that Anab sort of introduced the session with an insect-based theme, which is something I'd like to develop in my little talk here. So I want to talk about Ant now, specifically how we can use swarm intelligence to begin to do the sorts of things that I think several people have been getting at already, which is harnessing messy biological self-organizing processes for the purposes of building things, for designing stuff. And I just want to give you some insights into ongoing research in my group down the road at MMU. So I was reading an in-flight magazine the other day, and it was a really naff article, but it was one of these management empowering sort of management training articles. Why I was reading it, I don't know, but I came across this quotation from Vincent van Gogh, which I thought applied quite nicely to what we're doing. So basically he said, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Now I'm pretty sure he wasn't talking about ants, but it seems to capture in a single quotation what we're trying to get at, the idea of bringing lots of very small, simple things together to do really great things. And we're all familiar with the notion of a superorganism, the idea that you can have a large number of very simple organisms that behaves according to very different rules. If you take the individuals and put them in a group, suddenly they act like a larger organism. And the obvious example is the ant colony that I'll talk about later, but we've got things like bee colonies and so on. But I want to talk about ants not just as superorganisms, but as supercomputers. So my argument is that colonies of social insects can be considered as biological supercomputers. And not just social insects, we also do a lot of work on using bacteria, which I'll come to later. So the arguments that I'm going to put forward in this short talk are that we can learn from the behavior of social insects, for example. They can teach us how to build. They can teach us how to construct artifacts in our world, and that they can make an impact on our world. So the argument I'm making is that I'm trying to support this assertion that ant colonies can be thought of as biological supercomputers. And individual ants are very simple creatures. At one level, we can look at them in terms of simple machines. They move around, they sense chemicals in their environment, they talk to each other, but they're very robotic almost in their behavior. It's only when you get lots of ants together do you actually get any interesting behavior. So it's the collective nature of the colony that gives it its real power. Now, if you consider an individual neuron as a sort of chemical switch, not particularly smart individually, but you put billions of them together, you create an entity that's capable of writing keynote presentations, producing poetry, and having fights in the street on a Saturday night. Okay, that's not intelligent behavior, but you get my point. You get billions of very simple entities together in a population, you suddenly get consciousness and creativity. And later on in my talk, I want to show you a very simple example of how creativity almost emerges spontaneously from lots of simple things doing very simple actions. So the first example I want to use is termites. So termites, you give them a job piling wood chips. So you scatter a load of wood chips across the surface, and then you have termites, the job being to pile the wood chips into a number of piles. And if we program our termites to walk around randomly, and you give them this basic behavior, if I hit a wood chip and I'm not carrying anything, then I pick up the wood chip. If I'm carrying a wood chip and I hit another wood chip, drop the wood chip, okay? That's the sort of really simple rule that you can build into, that can be handled by the very small brain of a termite. So if we look at a movie of these things in action, so brown termites are carrying a wood chip, and white termites are just walking around looking for stuff. It's a bit of a choppy movie, but hopefully you can see that structures beginning to spontaneously emerge in this simulation, and you can see how the piles are gradually beginning to form purely as an emergent property of these very simple rules that we've programmed into our termites. And one termite on its own would never give rise to this behavior. It's only when you have hundreds of termites moving around do you get this distributed computation. And the rules were very straightforward. Okay, so we can learn from these creatures. And this is a plaster cast of an ant colony. Bert Hurldobler, who's a very famous ant scientist, basically says that an ant colony is a problem-solving instrument. We can use the behavior of ant colonies to solve problems, okay? The interaction of millions of ants reacting to different stimuli, reacting to each other, okay, can give rise to incredibly intricate structures like the ones we see here. But how? How do we actually use the behavior of ants? We can't actually take a load of ants and plug them into some sort of ant-based coprocessor attached to our laptop, okay? We have to build abstract models of their behavior, which we then apply algorithmically to the solution of problems. And we're very familiar with this sort of process. We've abstracted evolution to build genetic algorithms. We've abstracted the behavior of the brain to build neural networks, okay, to do pattern recognition. So ant-based algorithms have been very good at solving problems, for example, routing. Now, how can we route mobile phone traffic, for example, using the behavior of ants? Well, we harness a property of these natural systems known as stigmergy, which allows indirect coordination between collections of agents. So we allow agents to somehow modify their environment, maybe by laying a chemical trail or something. Okay? And this gives rise to self-reinforcing, self-organizing processes, which in turn give rise to the emergence of unplanned yet coherent behavior. So these things can... Okay, so here's a simple problem. We've got a load of ants in their colony to the left, and they want to get to the cake on the right. Unfortunately, there's a big elephant for some reason in the way. So there are basically two routes these ants can take. And we're often very interested in, if you've ever used Google Maps to get directions, you want the shortest path from A to B. This is how we can use stigmergy to automatically find the shortest path from A to B very quickly. So we set off these ants, and they're walking, and they're walking. Okay, so the one at the bottom, because it's a slightly shorter route, gets to the cake first. And when it's carrying food, it starts laying a food trail, saying, I've got food, on its way back to the nest. So its mate is way behind. So the next time you have an ant emerging from the nest, it's looking for a scent. So it picks up the scent that's already been laid by the guy that's come, sorry, the girl that's just come back with the food, okay, and then very quickly you get this reinforcing of the shortest path without anybody actually saying food over there, take a left at the twig, straight on, and then right at the dead bee, and there you are, okay? Nobody says any of that. It's simply very simple rules giving rise to very quickly emergence of the shortest path. Now, that's been used very successfully to route mobile phone traffic, okay? To schedule vehicle deliveries, loads of different problems on networks, okay, that involve finding a path from A to B via C. In our group, we were very interested in how we can actually create two-dimensional structures using these behaviors. So we define the rules and let the structures self-organize, let the structures emerge. So we're interested in how we can achieve structures without having any sort of top-down placement of components. And the problem that we want to solve is, given a collection of objects, small, medium, and large, how do we create a sort of bullseye structure? Okay, so this might be the sort of thing, if you're programming a swarm of robots on the surface of Mars, you want to get samples of rocks and pile them up in a certain way. Okay, how do you actually achieve this self-organization? Okay, so this is actually inspired by the way that ants tend their nests, with the smaller eggs at the center in a core and the larger objects, sort of the more ripe objects, on the outside. Okay, so we have a simple mechanism where we have a balance between attraction and repulsion, where we build a shell around each object. So each object has an attractive shell, the green shell, and a repulsive shell, at the red shell. So each object wants to have a certain number of objects in its immediate environment, so you get coherence, but it doesn't want to be too crowded, okay? And the size of each shell is a function of the size of the object. So the ants move around randomly, basically picking up objects, and if they're carrying an object, they look at the local attraction, repulsion, and decide whether or not they should drop the object. And if it's okay, they drop it. So this is very similar to the behavior of the termites. And this gives rise to what we may call the muesli effect, where if you shake a packet of muesli, you get the larger flakes sort of rising to the top, and then what you're left with at the end is basically mouthfuls of dust, okay? And that's the same sort of process. So here's the ants in action doing their sorting. So we start off with an early exploration phase where the ants are just moving around and running around and picking things up and dropping them down. But you can see there's not a lot of structure yet. And then we move into the second phase, which it's a very technical term that we use, faffing about, where they spend a lot of time, they've got a rough structure, and then they spend a lot of time running around faffing about, just basically picking things up and putting them back down again. So here you can see we've got the beginning of the structure emerging with the core of small objects in the middle, and then a sort of ring of medium-sized objects around that, and then larger objects around the outside. And when you're watching the simulation, you find yourself going, "No, don't pick that one up. That one was fine where it was. Pick that one up. Get that." They can't hear you. They're artificial ants. And then at the end, you've got final refinements where they run around nibbling the structure. Okay, so these sorts of results that we get. But then we thought, well, what happens if we actually make the job a bit harder and actually start with 3, rather than randomly distributing all the objects, start with 3 piles. And so basically on the left, we have 3 piles of a small, medium, and large pile. And they have to create the structure on the right, which is the core of small objects followed by a ring of medium and then an outer ring of large. And what we found was that they would spontaneously, without any change to the simulation, any change in the rules, any change in the parameters, anything, they would spontaneously form 2 intermediate sort of working piles. Okay, so they would take the 3 starting piles, merge them into 2 working piles, and then one of the working piles would gradually be sort of evaporated and sort of integrated with one of the others, with the other pile, and then that pile would be sorted. And that was a sort of creative process, a creative solution to a problem that spontaneously emerged. We didn't actually build that in. We didn't tell the ants to build a working set of piles. Okay? They did that all by themselves. So I would argue quite, well, not strongly, but this is a form of creativity. Okay, so we're familiar with termites, and these are some of the structures that termites, some of them looking very cathedral-like, some of them very large. Okay, and these are the sorts of structures that have been built by large colonies of insects. So in our group, I'll just finish with this, in our group we're interested not just in termites, but in bacteria. And we use living bacteria to build computers. And we're very interested, these are all spatial patterns that have been generated by groups of bacteria basically trying to solve problems in their environment. So they're trying to look for food, but moving costs, okay? Costs a lot of energy to move around, so you're doing constrained satisfaction. You're trying to work out the best way of doing X and Y whilst avoiding doing Z. So these are all pictures of bacterial colonies that are solving a problem in their environment. So basically, in our group, we're interested in using these bio-inspired self-organizing processes to design urban systems. And my PhD student, Danny Richards, is specifically interested in asking these questions. And he's really driving this research. So he's basically asking the questions, how do we construct complex spatial structures using these simple encoded processes? And can biological processes, such as the ones we've seen, and the processes that occur between living cells, for example, can they suggest new ways, new methods of building urban systems and constructing new forms? And how would we actually assess the value of what we produce? And that's a very tricky question. How do we actually assess the goodness of an object that's produced by such complex phenomena arising from simple behavior? So I guess I've posed more questions than I've answered. But I'd just like to close by with some acknowledgements. The ant clustering work was done with my student, Oliver Don. Danny, who's my current PhD student, has really driven the thinking on architecture and urban systems. And a mandatory acknowledgement goes to the university, the EPSRC, and the European Commission for actually paying for my group to exist. So thanks for listening.
Yep. Hi, Martin. I'm just wondering how the bacterial kind of pattern making and the ant intersects with this idea of synthetic biology.
Okay, well, that's one of the other. I know Anna mentioned synthetic biology earlier, so if anybody's not familiar with synthetic biology, it's the notion of engineering living organisms to get them to do cool, wacky, non-standard things. So getting rabbits to glow in UV light and so on. We do some of that work in our group as well. I mean, we're interested in engineering bacteria to basically do line dancing. We want to do bacteria that can, you throw them in a dish and you don't say, okay, you go here, you go here, you go here. When we originally started putting the funding proposals together, we were going to get, it was when London was trying to get the Olympics. So we were putting lots of pictures of bacteria sort of spontaneously forming the Olympic rings from an initial sort of colony. They would all run out and do basic bacterial line dancing. We didn't put that in the proposal, though, to form the Olympic rings. And from the synthetic biology point of view, we're interested in engineering cells that will self-organize into specific spatial structures, because it may well be that if you can persuade cells to adopt very specific three-dimensional structures, they can then, for example, deposit calcification agent or something to form three-dimensional scaffolding, which can then form the basis of artificial tissues, for example. So it's very, very early days. We're still playing around in the sand with this stuff, but I mean, the eventual aim is to engineer bacteria, engineer cells, maybe even human cells, to adopt complex three-dimensional shapes for functional purposes. Yeah.
I want to get each of you, I guess, a sort of, we are running a little over time as well, so maybe we can use this as a way to sum up, but get each of you to maybe give us a final reflection. I think I saw some interesting connections between, you know, the biological connection and the way of manipulating and organizing things, and then from a more psychological perspective, you spoke about that, Adrian, and then you, Karenza, were dealing with people and like on the ground and how they are interacting with their public spaces. And this is kind of maybe in art, we're always manipulating. It's not as obvious as in games or in, you know, scientific experiments or design experiments. But anyway, I wondered if you maybe after hearing each other's presentations have any kind of final comments.
No, that's fine. It's funny, that word manipulation, because it was something that I was just, I spent some time with an artist yesterday just doing the tour of and talking about some of the context of the place and sort of seeing that kind of response. And actually manipulation is part of it, as much as it's an open project and we're talking about a pilot approach and what works and what doesn't, and artists being very free to come up with their own ideas. Actually, you know, we are, and by my nature of my role as a facilitator, I suppose, in trying to influence conversation, but also potentially influence change. And I like some of these kind of approaches of the kind of bioorganic and kind of developing structures, because no matter how you kind of approach it, then these structures are happening, or you're trying to create structure and maybe organizing space as much as you're trying to be kind of fluid about it. So I think all these approaches, and I'm particularly interested in the kind of your approach with your collaboration and engagement. It's very similar to kind of a vibe that we're doing, but basically we are starting from we're all coming from a point of view where we see something that we want to go in and organise and try and sort out and maybe square off the edges. And yeah, it's been that. I think you're right. I think that's been the kind of similarity, even though we've all come from very different perspectives.
I just wanted Karenza to say, because I feel that the role of the facilitator is very important. Like, who sets the brief? Yesterday, Chris Terrett made a very interesting comment about secrets of failure and saying why this whole idea of why large organizations do not want to try small experiments and innovate quickly is because of the fact that there is this whole risk factor. And I think some of the things that we are trying out, maybe not so much the focus that has been on open source or data related, but more on the ground and in reality. And so I think it's very important to try and set these briefs for new projects with a different sort of perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think we need to sort of be very careful about understanding why we do the things that we do. In the sort of my previous life, I was a neuroscientist, studied neuroscience, which doesn't have anything to do with games. And you know, when I look at how far it's gone, and I've only been out of it for like 5 or 6 years, you know, you're able to sort of go and manipulate memories now, actually, in rats and things like that. So you can actually directly access memories by just shining a laser on certain genetically modified nerve cells. Yeah, optogenetics. And also just like in different areas, you've got massive companies talking about geoengineering now. I mean, it used to be a bit of a joke before, but now people are talking about, well, look, you know, if we can't stop people from emitting carbon, why don't we just go and throw a lot of silver into the sea? Or you know, that would only cost like $1 trillion, which is about a bit less than, you know, getting rid of coal-fired power plants. So the point is that the technology that we have and the power that we have in terms of science, in terms of technology, in terms of what we can do to ourselves and do to the world is just getting incredibly massive, actually. I think sort of people don't really realize what we can actually do now. And I think that makes it more important than ever that there is almost a more sort of fundamental education about getting people to understand the reasons for why we do these things. So alongside, you know, this whole kind of science economy and this whole kind of technology economy, we need to remember why, you know, we need to have this kind of old-fashioned liberal arts, basically, in terms of what our motivations are.
Well, as a scientist, I think I'm all too aware of something that Adrian said in terms of the notion of the H-index leaderboard and trying to get your paper cited and how you can game that system. Not suggesting I do. I think Karenza said something very important about how we need a truly multidisciplinary approach to asking questions about urban systems and cities, and that, you know, we can't just have people who've been trained in a single discipline deciding and making decisions. We need a very rich ecosystem of opinion in order to make decisions about systems. And I'm glad Anna mentioned biohacking. I'm going to go and build some beamer ants now, but it's actually. I'm glad that it seemed to be well received, the notion of biohacking, because as a sort of sub-project of one of my European projects, we're going to be looking at doing some community-based biohacking in Manchester. So watch this space.
Just on biohacking note, I'm not a fan of engineering new insects. It was clearly a provocation which actually Marie Claire, magazine about fashion, decided to put in their magazine as if we are the inventors of new insects and have we patented them and all. And that is precisely the point, that there's such a lot of anxiety and a need for debate around these new technologies. And I think it's a responsibility of not only designers but everyone to start asking those questions now rather than it just come to us a few years down the line.
Great. Well, if we have nothing further from the floor, then I think that I'd just like to thank you all for your fascinating insights. Thank you very much.